I'm not jealous that he's going to take you away. I'm jealous that you get to have a relationship with him. He sends you out greetings. I'm the one that responds to them.
You're on the talk now, too. You know the way to my heart. You just have to start producing.
Terrible shit.
Come on. Take a dump on TikTok.
I've struggled with various digestive issues over the years, so gut health is extremely important to me. Now, while gut health awareness has increased, it has led to a wellness trend that inspired a host of kind of questionable marketing claims and even false claims. You've seen the word probiotic attached to all kinds of supplements, drinks, and more, and they may claim to deliver the healthy microorganisms our guts need for proper function, but all too often the promises are really too good to be true. Thankfully, I became aware of a company called Seed and their flagship product, the Daily Synbiotic. That's right. Seed's Daily Synbiotic offers 24 clinically researched strains of microorganisms in a single dose. These strains support gut, skin, and heart health and promotes regularity, sometimes within as little as 24 to 48 hours. To me, what really sets Seed's Daily Synbiotic apart is its delivery system. This is my supply. While some products may offer the right strains, they are fragile and they rarely survive the trip through your gut. Seed uses a capsule-in-capsule design that helps ensure that 100% of the probiotics reach your colon where they matter most. Now, I've been taking Seed's Daily Synbiotic, and I encourage you to check out their story and the science behind what they do. To try it for yourself, just go to seed.com/Dr. Drew. Use code Dr. Drew for 20% off your first month of Daily Synbiotic. That is seed.com/Dr. Drew. Use code DRDREW, Dr. Drew.
Hey everyone, the dose of Dr. Drew.
It is indeed, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm still watching you guys on the restream here. Let me welcome in my guest. She, of course, is a friend of ours and a friend of the show. It is Dr. Kelly Victory. How long has it been, Dr. Victory, since you've been here?
I think it's been some months for sure. Probably 3 months, maybe.
I'm thinking more like, because I was sick for 3 months. And
no, it hasn't been more than that.
I was pre-Christmas, I would say, because I've only been sort of up and around for a couple of months.
Yeah, it could have been before the first of the year.
I think so. So let me just open by asking. Well, let me give Dr. Kelly's particulars. She's an emergency room doctor. She also has public health training, and that's why I enjoy talking to her. She has very well. And did you get a master's in public health? Is that your actual degree?
No. I went to Harvard School of Public Health for a number of different programs, including a very special program called the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, which is between the School of Public Health at Harvard and the Kennedy School of Government, specifically aimed at training their meta leaders, their term, not mine, for times of crisis.
And let's just focus in on that for a second. I want to talk about how things have changed since we last talked, because it's kind of interesting to sort of reevaluate our perspectives on things. But what's increasingly coming into focus for me is how badly we were failed in precisely the domain you're talking about and we're trained in, which is in the leadership of public health. I feel like the public health leadership was astonishingly misguided through this pandemic. In fact, I spoke to Dr. Gandhi. Do you know her at all? She's a HIV doc up in San Francisco, and she and I were talking, and she was saying that she couldn't believe it. I mean, we all worked in HIV back in the day, and we all got used to public health messaging and how to get a buy-in and how to get people to change their behaviors. Mm-hmm. And that was completely and categorically abandoned by the public health officials in this pandemic in terms of getting people to sort of buy into the behaviors that they wanted us to engage in, number one. Number two, there's ample evidence that we would have done it anyway because people aren't dumb. They sort of adjust their behavior when there's really a serious problem going on. And then number three, there was a layer, an opportunity in all of this to help from a public health perspective to educate people about how to use telemedicine and how to stay out of the hospital. And there was none of that. Do you agree with me on those 3 points? And do you see anything else?
Well, I see a number of I agree with you on all three plus more. There's no question in my mind, Drew, that this will go down in history as one of the greatest public health failures of our time. There's no question. First of all, start with the actual mandate of public health, which is to consider the impact of any particular response not just on the individual, but on the entire population. When somebody comes to my office or to my emergency department to see me, my sole responsibility is to that individual. Okay. So that's a sacrosanct one-on-one relationship. When I put on my public health hat, it's very different. So I need to consider the impact, for example, on the entire population when I start thinking about things like lockdowns, school closures, mandates on social distancing, limitations on bars
and when you say you're starting to think about the impact on larger swaths of the population, you're trying to do a risk reward analysis in your head based on available data. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is, so take that, and that's a perfect segue, because that risk benefit analysis has been left at the wayside. And that is a core tenet of public health. And that brings us right to when you start talking about things like medications that we might use to treat it, vaccinations, that idea that in this particular pandemic response, the leaders, if I can call them that, people at the helm of the response effort, acted as if everyone is at equal risk.
Right.
And that is not the case. Right. We knew from the very beginning with COVID-19, we knew who the people at great risk were, and they remain the same. People over the age of 70, people with a very well identified group of comorbidities. But instead, the people at the helm acted as if everyone is at equivalent risk, including children, healthy young people under the age of 50. And so they applied with a very broad, undiscerning brush. Here are the things that everyone should do. Everyone should wear masks. Everyone should stay apart. Everyone should do these things. And that is absolutely led us down a very, very bad path. If we instead had said, okay, we know how to do this. We can identify the risk people. We know who they are. Let's rally around and protect that relatively small group of people. We would not have decimated the economy, destroyed the educations of an entire generation of kids, and on and on and on.
And they did the same thing in the case of the vaccine rollout.
Yes.
Rather than focusing on the at-risk and the people that are at the front, they just... it was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen with that vaccine rollout.
And then on top of it, they squandered what I consider to be one of the greatest public health opportunities that we had to educate the public on things like how the immune system works and things that you can do, not just during COVID, not just during a pandemic, but all the time to decrease your risk of succumbing to a particular virus. Things we can do to enhance the functioning of our immune systems, all those things like vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc, those sorts of things, common sense things. The idea that we know that the number one comorbidity associated with COVID-19 is obesity. And instead of taking this last 14 months to really hone in on that and focus on that and give people a set of tools and a way to really address their individual weight issues, instead we said, hide in the basement, wear a mask, bathe in Purell, and pray to God that a vaccine comes to be.
Yeah.
And that's not a way to manage.
I'm not even sure they kept the vaccine in the equation. It was just shelter in place, boogeyman's coming. It was really bizarre. It was very, very strange. Now, a couple other things that I'm really interested in your insights now that we're sort of looking at it in the rearview mirror a little bit. What do you think caused such a tremendous distortion in public health responsiveness? As you educated me long ago, you will not find the word lockdown or social distancing in infectious disease. What do you think, where did that come from? What do you think the process was where that became the one and only intervention that public health leaned on? Where did that come from?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think it was largely political. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not here to say that the vaccine or that the virus isn't real. Obviously, it's real. And obviously, many people have been profoundly impacted by it. I'm not one of those people who says, oh, they want to plant nanochips in us. It's not about that. But it was, I think, highly political. And what I mean is that they took advantage of this pandemic, which was real, to, I believe, further other social justice causes, everything from climate change to universal health care. Let's face it, one of the greatest ways to address things like climate change is to get everyone to stay home, stop traveling, don't get on an airplane, don't go to work from home. One of the best ways to push a socialized medicine or a universal healthcare agenda is to say we all need a passport of some sort where we can collect our individual healthcare data. So I think that it was really enhanced by some other political agendas, unfortunately, and because control and the ability to control the entire population is an intoxicating thing. And I think it served some political purposes at the time. It defies logic, Drew, to eschew existing medications that have been FDA approved, for example, for decades, inexpensive medications that are over the counter in most of the rest of the world, things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and to eschew those and instead focus only on medications that people can get while in the hospital or on the development of a vaccine. So the only thing I can really come to is that it served a political agenda for certain people, and it's led us, unfortunately, down just a tragic historic event here in this. And as I said, it's going to take years to unwind this, and we may never really come to all the answers.
Speaking of cheap available medication, I had a long hauler syndrome about 6 weeks into my COVID recovery, and I took fluvoxamine. And it worked like crazy. I mean, it really worked. Within 30 minutes, my first dose, the tinnitus I've had from COVID resolved.
Right.
Now, it came back and it was lower intensity, all kinds of stuff, but my fatigue and all that crazy fogginess really got better on fluvoxamine over a course of about 2 weeks. So that's a good example of why aren't they advocating for this safe medicine that's pennies a pill? I mean, it's just the most bizarre thing to me. And then, but what about our profession? I mean, particularly primary care, like medicine and ER, it's like they're frozen in place, like they were afraid to do anything. Now, were they afraid because everyone's part of a big corporate structure now and they were afraid of being disciplined or something? It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. You know what I'm talking about?
Boy, do I know what you're talking about. Really, probably the single most disconcerting thing for me about this pandemic, because it has shown my colleagues and my profession in a very poor light. I think it's multifaceted. In part, it is because of the corporatization of medicine and the fact that so few people actually own their own private practices. They are part of large corporations, largely controlled by a hospital system. And I think they are fearful that they will lose that ability. It's amazing to me how many patients I knew that were admitted to the hospital and were told once they were in the hospital that, quote unquote, our hospital will not allow us to give ivermectin or
or anything for an early illness.
When does a physician take their directions from the CEO of a hospital system?
And Kelly, that was so pervasive in the stories I was hearing that I thought to myself, you know what? You don't need, if the goal is to put nurse practitioners and physician extenders in there, mission accomplished, because there's no reason for our judgment. I'm used to improvising and using my judgment and to based on my experience, my reading the literature, come up with the best solution for that patient in that clinical situation. If I'm just following clinical pathways, put an NP in there. That's fine. That's fine.
If we're going to act as if medicine is based on only an algorithm and that there is no individualism and cost-benefit analysis and really critical thinking about it, then put a computer in there and just
computer, sure,
and it'll spit out the answer. We know that that's not how you practice good medicine. You and I do, and you and I are of an age that we actually laid hands on patients. Unfortunately, I really feel that what I'm seeing in today's training of physicians coming out, the younger physicians are largely reliant on testing, whether it's lab testing or radiographic testing or whatever else. They really don't apply the same level of physical exam that you and I did. And they kowtow, unfortunately, to their masters, who end up being large hospital systems and mandates about how to apply things algorithmically rather than based on really good interpretive skills and coming up with a differential diagnosis. I mean, when you come up with make a decision for any patient, I don't care if you've got a patient who's got high cholesterol and you're trying to make a decision of, should I put this patient on a statin drug like Lipitor? You go do that cost benefit analysis. All drugs have some potential side effects. Tylenol does, my goodness. You know, Tylenol can cause liver failure and death. So we make decisions based on a cost benefit analysis. But all of a sudden with this pandemic, I had, you know, colleagues who would never think about, eating a GMO tomato or feeding their kid a non-organic carrot, are all of a sudden suggesting that everybody should take an experimental vaccine. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, this defies logic. And so I really witnessed something amongst my own colleagues that I found very disconcerting. And unfortunately, many of them failed. You and I tend to go to the literature ourselves. I know, having talked with you as much as I have over the years, you actually go and get the study.
Always. I that's my job. This always was our job to understand the landscape of the literature. I mean, maybe I don't read it well or as carefully as I could, but I read it. I go look at it all the time.
Instead of getting this summary from some news source, any news source, go to the literature, read it, actually do the research and come up with the analysis yourself of whether the conclusions that they came to in that study you think are even right. Do you agree with their conclusions? And so I wasn't seeing that. I had the good fortune to become friendly with and to have some collegiate interaction very early on with some very good names in this fight. People like Harvey Reish and Peter McCullough and Paul Alexander and folks who were doing the research themselves. And fortunately, I've had the opportunity to speak. We speak nearly daily on these issues and swap stories about patients, what's working, what's not, what are we seeing, what are the trends, what's concerning, what are the theories people are coming up with. And that has kept me sane.
Yeah. And that to me, I'm with you. That was the most astonishing part. I didn't know that had happened to our profession, and that it became glaringly obvious. It was all on the primary care side. When I would talk to my surgical colleagues, they were like, let's go, let's improvise, let's get going. They were they were doing all kinds of stuff, but it was really on the primary care side. It was really something. So I want to go back to your assessment that this was a political misadventure. Let's take as an assumption that nobody had any pre-existing goals in terms of wanting to control or have a effect on climate change or have an effect on a unified single payer system. Let's just, for the sake of discussion, say nobody really had that in their mind when they started out. And when I remember what was going on at the time, let's go back a year and a couple of months. What I remember was an out of control press. What I remember was New York Times editorial board saying they're going to resign if we don't do what they did in China. And look at Italy. They didn't do what we did in China. Look at how great Wuhan was and what they did. We need to be like that. And I remember being extremely disturbed by that at the time, because I knew that what they were doing in Wuhan was nothing, no doctor would ever have recommended that. And at the time I wondered, gosh, it looks like, are they hiding something? It's because this is not infectious disease practice. This is totalitarianism in full regalia. And I wondered what their motivation was, because it wasn't medical. And I just kept saying, if you look at me on videos back then, I kept saying the press needs to shut up. They need to shut up. We need to listen to the CDC, listen to Fauci, just shut the hell up. Because I could see they were forcing this thing. Then Trump took a position, And all the states took a position contrary to that and went off to do what they did in Wuhan, which was, that's what it looked like to me at the time, and even in retrospect. Now, there may have been some gratification from it in the areas where you were saying, you know, where you get control, and I like telling people how to live, and maybe we could do something with greenhouses. I get there's sort of, it was almost like all that stuff was secondary gain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I think you're right. I think it began with this, you know, frankly, I think there's a faction that saw it as a way to impact the upcoming election at the time. I do think that that was guiding much of what was going on with the media. It's tragic, and it always will lead you to the wrong decision when you take into account, or when you start to weigh things like, will I be considered to be xenophobic if I do this? If I shut down, you know, travel from China, will people think I'm a racist? Instead of being able to say, what is the right thing to do from a public health perspective?
Yeah.
Epidemiology 101, pandemic 101, Drew, is identify the people who've been exposed and shut the door.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pandemic 101. Yet, unfortunately, when we are in such a highly politicized, you know, people are so amped up about being called a racist or xenophobic that they instead, you know, you'll remember as soon as President Trump said we need to shut off travel from China, there were people saying, you know, oh my gosh, how can you do that? That's a racist, xenophobic thing to do. But in fact, it was the right thing to do. I was very critical back during the Ebola pandemic when we didn't shut off travel from sub-Saharan Africa for the same reason, not because I'm a xenophobe, but because I know how to stop the spread of infectious disease. So I think that when people take into account how will this impact me politically, or how will people perceive me politically if I do this, you're always going to come to the wrong decision. We need to stick to what's the science, what's in the best interest of, you know, the population, and make those changes. And then
it should have been the CDC all the way along. It was during H1N1. Why? I mean, it's like, what the hell? And if I'm getting my data correct, I don't remember where the CDC ever recommended lockdown or school closure. They didn't.
It's never been done. Yeah. Honestly, lockdowns, Drew, were used for about 2 weeks in Africa, interestingly, during one of the big Ebola outbreaks, and it was aborted because it has such a devastating effect on the entire population. It goes back to my original point. In public health, we have to consider the impact on everyone, not just on a single disease process. And when I talk about the health, I mean not just physical health. It's got to be emotional health, spiritual health, economic health, all of that. And in fact, I would submit that the response to this pandemic did far, far, far more damage than the virus itself. The number of people who have been, gone into substance abuse and depression, people who've missed screenings for cancer and heart disease, people who have you looked at the statistics on the average weight gain that happened during the lockdown? Yeah, I did hear about
that. Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh my Lord. Yeah. For millennials, the average weight gain was 41 pounds. I mean, my gosh, this is not where we should have gone, let alone when you talk about truly the economic impact, which is, frankly, can't be overestimated.
All right. So there's so much to talk about. I think we is anybody working on chronicling the history of this event, of what just happened? Do we know about that?
Well, I know that people like Alex Berenson, who's
you should, Drew.
I should write a history.
Alex Berenson is Jordan Schachtel, a couple of other good investigative journalists have been looking at it. I certainly have been blogging it and keeping track of it, and I'm sure you have too. I think it will will go down in history, I think, as a debacle, of a failure of epic proportions. And we won't know the true numbers.
Right.
and we can get into the truly, what was the real impact in terms of cases, deaths, all that from this pandemic. When we ultimately are able to tease out which ones actually were a result of COVID, which ones were associated with COVID, which ones, was an overcoding of COVID deaths and COVID cases. It'll be a long time before we sort through all of this.
And to that same point, we're going to have all this mental health stuff, and some of it is going to be neurological from COVID. Some of it is going to be loneliness. Some of it is going to be developmental. Some of it is going to be trauma. So, I mean, it's just going to be one thing after another. It's going to be super duper crazy for the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, Dr. Menninger, the guy that set up the Menninger Institute in 1920, felt that the majority of the psychiatric illness he was seeing was actually neurobiological effects of the 1918 flu.
Interesting. And well, it'll be when you add that into things like the impact on kids from missing kids who are in their really prime developmental years, who missed the social interaction of being in school, the impact on young children, toddlers, and infants, of spending all this time seeing largely people with face masks on.
And being scared, frightened, like what's going on? This is not good for people.
Being scared of others, being, that they shouldn't hug or touch or get too close to people. I mean, really, it's been a social experiment of epic proportions. And I truly am not overestimating when I say it will be decades, I believe, before we fully sort out what was the impact and what, the long-term effects of all of this.
So I want to hear what has changed in your perspective. But before we do, I want to do a little vaccine talk, mostly because the thread here is talking a lot about vaccines. So vaccines are good, right? They've been turned to be, they look very good, even though that you were worried about mass distribution of something that didn't have a track record, which is out of the abundance of caution, nothing unusual about that, right? You were just being your usual conservative, careful self. Yes? Yeah,
I am pro-vaccine in general. I mean, I've been called a vaccine zealot in the past. I've done shows and written and spoken prolifically about vaccines. It's one of the most important things we do in public health. When I say that, though, I mean vaccines that have been tested and fully vetted and have gone through the rigors of trials before they are really launched to the public. So my concern with these vaccines for COVID was that they were clearly rushed. I mean, there's a reason that vaccines in general take 4 to 6 years to come to market, if they ever come to market at all. Many of them, as you know, fail during the trial period and never go to market. But 4 to 6 years is on average how long it takes to get a vaccine from the laboratory out to market. These were launched in a matter of months. None of them, as you know, are FDA approved. And so I have had significant concerns about all of them. And top of that, there has never in the history of medicine been a successful mRNA vaccine, which is the technology that Pfizer and Moderna use. All of that said, the initial numbers that are coming in looks like all three of these vaccines are largely going to look like they're going to be effective, that they do seem to decrease not only the incidence of COVID transmission, but also of severe illness. So that's very good. And it really remains to be seen what the adverse effects are going to be. We're just starting to collect that data now. Yeah, I mean, the mRNA vaccines are looking pretty good. The Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca are having the trouble, right? Well, to be clear, I mean, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are having particular trouble with the thrombosis issue, with the blood clotting issue. Yeah. But the numbers of adverse events that have been reported with Moderna and Pfizer are larger by an order of magnitude, in part because more of them have been given. Yeah. But the numbers are quite large in terms of adverse events all across the board, everything from severe local reactions to neurologic issues, lots of incidents of things like Bell's palsy, which is a paralysis of a branch of the facial nerve, seizures, those sorts of things. It's interesting. I'm just realizing that you and I have, I think where we diverge is in sort of our risk tolerance. You know what I mean? Because
Because I feel like if masks work, fine, and you're concerned, no, they're going to have bad effects. And my thing is, the vaccines look good, they'll get us out of here. There'll be some side effects. Let's move. And you're being more circumspect. You're saying, look, I'm concerned.
Again, what I would do, and I respect anyone's decision to get a vaccine, but what I try to do is advise people to make a risk-benefit calculation. If you're 70 years old and have heart disease, or you're 50 and are obese, or you have diabetes, or you have some underlying risk factor, then your tolerance for an experimental vaccine that the side effects we aren't quite sure about is going to be different than if you're a healthy 30-year-old with no risk factors at all.
That's right.
Why would you do that? So I simply am advocating that people go in eyes wide open and say, if you aren't in one of those risk categories and you're below the age of 50, say, and your risk of having a bad outcome from COVID is de minimis, then maybe you've got time to wait until we get a little bit more data in.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're in that risk category, I would say it's worth it to you to say, because if you get COVID, your chance of having a bad outcome is significantly higher. So it's really a risk-benefit calculation.
I hear you. And again, my risk tolerance, I'm realizing, because I've always trying to figure out where we diverge. And I think it's risk tolerance is really the spot. And so to that point, I'm very concerned about viral replication. So I've shifted I was exactly where you were at the beginning of the vaccine distribution. And then I started thinking, we do have a little bit of a collective obligation to reduce the replication so this thing doesn't have a chance to mutate more. Where do you come in on that?
Well, my thought about, first of all viruses mutate. And that's a fact of life. The great news is when they mutate, they become weaker, less virulent.
Usually.
In the history of mankind, I defy anyone. This is one of the things that's really bothered me about the lay press, the mainstream media, and even those people at the helm who talk about these, quote, dangerous variants. Variants will become more contagious. It's a survival mechanism for the virus. As it mutates, it becomes more contagious and less severe. That's how the virus continues to stay alive or to stay in existence, because it doesn't behoove not that I'm personifying a virus, if it could think, it doesn't behoove the virus to kill a larger and larger percentage of hosts, because it will end up becoming extinct. So viruses all mutate, but they become weaker as they do. We have no reason to believe that any of these viruses will escape the vaccinations, or frankly the other treatments like hydroxychloroquine,
or the your immune response,
or your immune system. If you look at people who had gotten infected with SARS back in 2003, okay, the difference genetically between SARS in 2003 and COVID-19 is about 20%.
No, I understand, and there's still lot of immunity
and those
out there.
people are still okay.
So
versus the mutations that are happening now are changing by 0.03%.
Yeah, I mean here's because I'm part of a study group and I've been watching this very carefully. So 30% of the people, their antibodies fall off quickly, 30% they fall off over 3 months, and 30% they stay up. I'm in the stay up group, interestingly. And even amongst those three, we have no idea what our cellular immunity is doing yet. It could be the cellular immunity is perfectly fine in all three cases, right? Yeah, and the probability is it's perfectly fine in all three cases. Yes, yeah. So that's what you're talking about here, and I totally understand that. But as somebody recovering from, I had a bad time with COVID. I do not want this freaking thing again. Kelly, you'll appreciate this as someone who's had brain stuff going on in your own life. It felt like what you went through, frankly. It felt like I was hit in the head, like a really serious traumatic brain injury.
No, and I feel for anyone who's had a bad go of it. The bottom line is, we look now, even if we're conservative, somewhere in the range of 180 million to 200 million Americans have had and recovered from COVID.
Mm-hmm.
That's the CDC's estimate, that 6 to 8 times more people than have been diagnosed. So if you take the low end, that's somewhere around 180 million. Add on top of that the number of people who've already been vaccinated. As of yesterday, just over 120 million Americans have already received at least one dose, and 68 million are fully vaccinated. Okay, that's you're talking about 22% of the population is already fully vaccinated, on top of that 200 million who've had and recovered from COVID. So the great news is, from my perspective, is that we are getting ever closer, if not already at herd immunity. Certainly in certain communities. If you take, for example, the Hasidic Jewish community, the Mennonites, the Amish, people who live in largely insular communities, they are all absolutely at herd immunity. And that happened before they ever even got the vaccines. So there's really good news in my mind, regardless of how you feel about vaccines, that we are getting closer every day to herd immunity.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Kelly, since you're so good with numbers, I know that. I've learned over the last year that you have your statistics down. What percentage of the country are kids under like 8?
I could tell you there's
10,
70,
or 16, like anybody who hasn't hit puberty.
70 million under the age of 17.
So another 20%.
Yeah. And who have really a de minimis or near zero risk from COVID. They are currently not able to get vaccines. Pfizer actually can be given down to as young as 16. Moderna and J&J were only approved, even under the EUA, to be given to people as young as 18. That may change over time. The vaccines have largely not been tested on children. So I am hoping that they do a little bit more testing, and specifically some testing to look at potential fertility issues in women of childbearing age and in girls who have yet to have children. But that's another 70 million.
So like 40% of America doesn't need a vaccination now. So we've got like 60% left. They have the opportunity or should think about it, but not necessarily need it.
Right. And I think, and again, I fully respect anyone's decision to get vaccinated. I have many, many good friends and colleagues who I would say are not in a risk category who chose to do it. Some of them for personal reasons having nothing to do with their health. I have friends who have done it because they said, I want to go on a cruise.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to go.
Me too.
That's why I did it.
I don't want to be prohibited from traveling.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of these vaccine passports are somewhat frightening to me, but I can understand why people have folded to that fear and gotten a vaccine for those reasons. And I respect anyone's decision to do it. I just think that there are certain people who have the whatever you want to call it, the luxury to wait a little bit if they aren't in a risk category, and would feel more comfortable waiting until one or more of these actually gets FDA approved.
So which is coming for the two probably, but let's talk about the reactions to the AstraZeneca and the J&J for a second, because I took the J&J and I woke up with a black eye, which is a weird and potential sign of a transverse sinus thrombosis, which is the dreaded complication of this vaccine. So I've had my face pushed to the mirror a bit, as it were, with this particular vaccine.
But maybe you got an elbow in the eye.
But I went and read a lot about it because of that, and it's very strange. I don't feel they haven't figured it out yet. Let's be clear, and they're still out there collecting data. That's what they're holding off on. But the thing I found most fascinating was this notion. It seemed to me that the mechanism of the clotting was probably something like an antiphospholipid antibody, which is the mechanism of clotting in COVID, right? In other words, COVID is not an activation of the thrombotic system of the clotting system. It's a separate phenomenon that causes platelet aggregation. It doesn't really respond very well to anticoagulants, and there's also some thrombophilicity, I guess. There's some thrombotic activation as well, but maybe that's fibrinogen next to the platelets or some platelet activation factor, or who the hell knows. So, but it looks to me like the same thing that COVID does, which I find fascinating. And yet, when I hear the conversation amongst the so-called experts, they keep saying it's the virus doing it. It's the adenoviruses, because the chimpanzee and the human adenovirus in both those vaccines are similar, and it must be the adenovirus doing it, which I thought, well, maybe, but I don't get that conclusion. Do you?
No, it's very unclear to me. I'll be very clear.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't heard a compelling theory yet
Yeah.
for why both AstraZeneca and J&J, both of which use an adenovirus as their platform, both of them have had issues with this very, very rare form of clotting.
But
Because
let me tell you something. I want to interrupt you and just say I've talked to people now who've had sort of really kind of intense reactions to the J&J vaccine, and a couple of people have said to me, yeah, my doctor did a blood count, my platelet counts weren't really that low, but they saw clumping. And I thought, oh my God, there may be a lot more subclinically going on with this phenomenon than we really even know.
Exactly. And that's one of my concerns. So let's be clear. All 4 vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, and AstraZeneca, have had issues with blood clotting. All of them. If you look at the adverse event reporting system, all of them had. What was interesting about AstraZeneca, and that's where it was first noticed, was this very, very rare form of blood clot that happens, as you said, in the cerebral venous sinus, which is a large vein system in the brain that clot there makes your brain unable to drain blood from it, essentially. So when people think about
you get a
blood
black
clots,
eye as a sign of it.
well, most people, when they hear blood clot, they think the blood clot most people are aware of is that when you get one in your calf.
Yes,
say
yes.
from riding on an airplane.
And you know who had this very clot was Hillary Clinton. And I got in trouble for talking about it because I said, "Whoa, her doctors were doing a really crappy job of taking care of it." She actually had a kind of a typical reaction, which it causes also a midbrain stroke that goes along with the transverse sinus thrombosis sometimes.
And so that's the difference. The blood clots you get in your extremities are very different because they can be treated with anticoagulants. When you get a blood clot in your brain, you cannot treat it that way because it's essentially a form of a stroke. And if you put that person on a blood thinner, they can easily hemorrhage into their brain and make a very, very serious thing devastating. So AstraZeneca was the first started having some of these brain clots forming, and then all of a sudden J&J did. So you really have to say this is a very, very rare type of clot. Why is it happening with these two that use a common platform with the adenovirus? I haven't heard yet a compelling theory because I'm with you. I don't believe it's the adenovirus itself because adenoviruses are extraordinarily common. It's a common virus that's out there. These have been rendered inert in the vaccine, but people who get adenovirus don't all of a sudden develop brain clots. So I don't know what it's related to, but I think it warrants further study. And and I think that the blood clotting or the bleeding issues, not just clotting issues, but bleeding issues that people are experiencing with Pfizer and Moderna also warrant.
Yeah, the bleeding seemed to, again, it's very hard to parse it all out because it's coming in from far and wide. But the bleeding I saw was either exactly what you were talking about, something related to the transverse sinus thrombosis, or thrombocytopenia. There's a lot of thrombocytopenia from the platelet aggregation, as best I can tell. It's a consumptive coagulopathy. It's not. But
normally, Drew, normally these sorts of adverse events would be discovered, would be investigated during the trial period, during the 4 to 6 years that I was talking about. So in a way, what's happening here, and one of my concerns, in addition to the fact that somebody may have a stroke or a heart attack or a bleeding issue, is that Americans are really seeing the sausage get made, if you will.
No, that's right.
These are experiments that would have happened prior to FDA approval, not when the thing is launched on the public. So my concern from a public health perspective, when you talk about vaccine hesitancy, nothing drives vaccine hesitancy faster than launching something before it's ready for prime time, having people have a bad side effect, because I guarantee you, unfortunately and tragically, a certain portion of the population, this will bleed over and they don't think it through. The next thing you'll hear is, well, I'm not sure I want to get my child vaccinated for chickenpox or polio because you know what happened with J&J, and they aren't putting together that vaccines for polio and chickenpox and measles and hepatitis have been fully vetted. They're FDA approved. We did the studies on those. We know the answers. We know the safety profile. And so I don't want to drive global or more broad sweeping vaccine hesitancy because of what's happening right now with the COVID-19 vaccines.
I get your thinking. And again, this is where our risk tolerance is like grinding together. I'm like, I want to get out of this thing. I'm willing to take the risk. I'm glad I took the J&J vaccine. I don't care if my platelets are clumping. The risk of a transverse sinus thrombosis is 0.00009%.
Right.
So I'm much more likely to have been smacked in the eye by my wife.
Yes.
Oh, did I say something?
Yes.
So
I think I elbowed
services.
him in my sleep. Maybe I almost did it this morning.
But what's interesting to me is I actually may have had some platelet aggregation, perhaps, and maybe my clotting was not quite what I take aspirin because of my Lynch syndrome, right? And so I take aspirin all the time, and maybe that with some whatever's going on with the platelet function was enough to cause a spontaneous bleeding, or with just a limited touch to my eye of spontaneous. That's all I call spontaneous.
I don't want people like you, all the people who got J&J vaccines before,
to
including
panic.
up to the hour before the J&J was put on hold.
Yeah.
I don't want those people laying sleepless at night thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, because the chance that you're going to have a bad effect, a bad adverse reaction is low. And so I don't want people losing sleep over it. Once you've made the decision to get vaccinated, good on you. And I wouldn't lose sleep over it. If you haven't been vaccinated yet and are concerned or had some concerns already, then you might choose to wait until we have more data in and know a little bit more about the risk profiles of all the vaccines that are available.
Susan, they're not hearing your hypothesis
Okay,
about how my black eye occurred.
So this morning, I want to explain something to everybody. I had a little surgery about a week ago. I had my eyes lifted, and I'm announcing it now. And I was taking sleep pills, and I have to sleep kind of sitting up, and I've been thrashing around a lot.
And I felt I had sympathetic pregnancy when she was pregnant, and now I had sympathetic black eye.
So I think, and this morning when I woke up, he wakes up about 5 in the morning snoring, or he wakes me up snoring in the morning, and I kind of turn over fast sometimes, and I noticed that my elbow went straight towards his eye socket this morning, like he was in his position that he's always in the morning, and I just missed hitting him in the face. So there was a small probability that I poked you in the eye. Now, I also want to defend myself. We didn't feel it, but you also bruised super easy because you're on.
When Kelly and I are saying that might be part of my reaction to the vaccine plus my aspirin therapy. I mean, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I may not have hit
happen.
you that hard. I may have.
Good out. I like the reasoning.
We'll tell that to social. Drew, love doesn't have to hurt, Drew.
We'll tell that to social services.
We can get help for you. We can get help for you.
No, but it was funny. I was like,
at home.
I just missed his face this morning. So there's a good possibility it was me.
So, Kelly, the one thing that we did not have on our plate last time you and I met for sure was the monoclonal antibodies. And I find those very exciting. Also, the new Merck product that is a reverse transcriptase inhibitor, essentially. And I got the monoclonal antibodies during my COVID, and it kept me out of the hospital for sure. That was the reason I didn't go in the hospital. I was going down. During the infusion, I improved. I mean, it was marked. Yeah. So where do you come in on all that? And using Regeneron as a sort of a preventative measure now, they're saying you can use it instead of vaccine, all this kind of stuff. So where are you at with all that?
First of all, I think the monoclonal antibodies are a great thing. We've been using, to be very clear, we've been using convalescent plasma, taking the plasma from people who've had an illness and infusing it into people who are currently trying to fight something. We've been doing that since the early 1900s. It's a tried and true way to get people over a bad illness. What you're doing fundamentally is borrowing antibodies, in that case, from someone who's already recovered and giving them to the person who's ill and struggling. What the monoclonal antibodies do is they essentially form those, it's a laboratory formulated version of those antibodies. So you don't have to get them from other individuals. We actually are making the antibodies in a lab and giving them to people. It's remarkable, and I think it's absolutely should be used. It's been tragic, frankly, Drew, that it hasn't been used as much as it should have been.
That's right.
Because they're out there. I can't. it's amazing to me how many people have been sent home to suffer at home when we have these monoclonal antibodies available. So I'm very plucky on them.
And so when I started talking about it, people were saying, I talked to my doctor, I talked to the ER doctor, they told me that I can't get it. It's only if you're in the hospital, which is the exact opposite of the truth. It's only for outpatient therapy.
Exactly. There's
weird.
Again, it's so much misinformation and disinformation, even amongst our own colleagues. It's been tragic.
And could have been a great opportunity for public health, for the public health people to go, hey, you don't have to go to the doctor's office. You can find a doctor that will do telemedicine. You can do a lot over the phone, and they can initiate having an infusion therapist come out to your house if you meet criteria, and you should know what that is to discuss with your doctor. I never heard that.
Yeah, no, in fact, the only downside I can think of to monoclonal antibodies, same as with convalescent plasma, is that if you use those to get over your COVID infection, you don't in general mount your own immune response because you have those antibodies that are coming in exogenously. You don't then, it isn't,
that's a theory though, because
it isn't reliable that you will. Some people do create enough antibodies, and some people, their immune system says, why should I create antibodies? I just got a whole load of them infused. I don't need to create them. So it's not reliable that you will then have ongoing immunity. But that's a small price to pay to me for somebody who's profoundly ill and about to end up getting, admitted or on a ventilator. That's a small price to pay.
And I, as an N of 1, had the monoclonal antibodies, had a marked response to it, and had very high endogenous antibody response that is persistent. So
you may have mounted your antibody response. I don't know when in the course you got
day 6 or 7.
So you probably had already, you've got a healthy immune system. You probably were already ramping up your antibodies at the time you got, that's just my theory, by the time you got that boost from the monoclonal antibodies, but your immune system was already well on the way probably to responding on its own.
Could have been.
But nonetheless, I'm very, very keen on monoclonal antibodies.
Yeah, I will tell you, I've shared this story many, many times on this stream, but when I was there was a really nice infusion nurse I was chatting with. He came to my house, did the infusion, and I said, I'm going to tell you what I'm experiencing because it's kind of vivid. And I said, first of all, I feel stronger. It's a 1 hour infusion. About 30 minutes in, I felt stronger. And he goes, yeah, I heard that all day. And about 40 minutes, I said, something really strange is happening. Colors are getting brighter for me because neurologically I was out of it. And I'm saying, things are getting more vivid. He said, I hear that too. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? So, yeah. So there you go. All right. Let me roll back here. So I haven't heard yet your thoughts on, what things have, I've been updating my priors all the way along through this pandemic, and I've made some mistakes, and I've got some things right, and things have come into clearer focus for me. What has changed in your perspective? What have you updated? What have you changed? What have you adjusted?
Well, for sure. First of all, I'd go all the way back to the beginning when in the first days and weeks of the pandemic, I actually was a believer that this virus had emanated from a wet market in China. That story, I actually thought that was plausible. Frankly, having spent a lot of time in those wet markets myself in China and seeing what goes on there. As soon as we had access to the actual genomic information about the virus, it became very, very clear to me that that was not the case, that this was a lab modified virus. I make no, I won't say whether or not how it got out, whether that was purposeful or not. I have no idea if it was a lab error, just abject incompetence, or something in between. But I have no question that this was a lab modified virus. It was not naturally occurring. So that's one thing that I changed. With regard to the treatment, outpatient treatment, I think, is largely available if it's used early. I have continued to expand the protocol with others on how we do that. So I don't believe any longer that for many people that one drug like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, that one thing by itself will turn the tide. It's really a cocktail of things, including things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, but also steroids
And keep your eye on fluvoxamine, because that goes with the ivermectin. I had steroids too. I had Decadron for a good 10 days or so.
Did you do inhaled steroids, budesonide?
No, I did Decadron straight out, and it helped me right away. I could tell that was the first thing that sort of stopped my slide, and then the bamlanivimab really just kept me right in there. The interesting thing about the illness I will share with you, as compared to H1N1, which I had also. H1N1, I was much more toxic. I was like, really, I kept calling the infectious disease guy going, am I supposed to be this toxic? I can't lift my head up. This one was neurologically more active and more relentless. Every day was exactly like the next. There was no like, you couldn't get out of it. It just stayed and stayed day in and day out. And that's, I think, how the wheels come off the wagon for some people. You know, your body starts...
Right. Well, I think it's largely, an inflammatory mediated.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an inflammatory response. Some people have a more vigorous inflammatory response. It's just a fact of nature. They're the people who break out into hives more easily, have more allergies, have more swelling when something happens, have, those sorts of things. The upside when you have a brisk inflammatory response is you tend to be a better healer. You heal bones faster, skin faster, those sorts of things, because those things are actually enhanced by inflammation. So it's a mixed bag, but there's no question there are individual responses. And so when I've been tailoring the treatment cocktail, it's really based on some of those individual things, that it is not a one size fits all, which, let's face it, so much of medicine is that way. It's not a one size fits all cocktail based on this virus. So I've changed that over this last year.
And you probably, like me, learned about long hauler syndrome a little more. We're working with a group called COVIDlonghaulers.org. Is that it, Susan? COVIDlonghaulers.org is a website you can go to. An anesthesiologist and HIV researcher friend of ours is doing a lot of research on long haulers. And there it is right now. They're actually doing cytokine panels, and I got mine done when I was in my long hauler thing. And my neurocytokines like VEGF were up, which was very interesting. And it ties into the sigma-1 receptor agonism of fluvoxamine, which would be sort of directed at that whole process. And lo and behold, that worked for me. So isn't that interesting? So we're learning all the time about these things.
It is. And one of the things I think that hopefully people have started to understand is that the concept of long haulers isn't unique to COVID-19. There are many viruses that actually cause long-term or ongoing impact on neurologic systems, cardiac systems, the kidneys, even influenza. I mean, let's face it, every single year during influenza season, we will see a handful of people who come in with cardiac issues, dilated cardiomyopathies related to a virus, long-term neurological impact related to influenza. Chronic fatigue syndrome has been tied to Epstein-Barr virus, and people who've had mononucleosis that has ended up resulting in quote, long haulers for mononucleosis. So COVID-19 is not unique in the fact that it has this ability. It seems to be more prevalent with COVID-19, perhaps because people have a heightened awareness of it, but it is not unique to COVID-19.
Yeah. In fact, I was talking to somebody yesterday in Clubhouse, and she was saying that her sister had this huge workup for this mysterious abdominal pain syndrome and was having spontaneous bruising and all kinds of stuff. And I said, two things I said. I said, well, think about acute intermittent porphyria. Think about something called Gardner-Diamond syndrome, which is this autoerythrocyte sensitivity syndrome. I forgot to mention familial Mediterranean fever. So if you are listening today, I was troubled by that last night. Familial Mediterranean fever is another thing that kind of thing could be. But I bring this up because I went on to say, it also could be a post-viral syndrome, right? We have drastically changed our appreciation of how protean and profound post-viral syndromes can be.
Exactly. And that's what my point is. It's not just post-COVID, it's post-viral. There are
Yeah.
lots of viruses that can do this. And I would say, the immune system, in my mind, is the last great frontier of human medicine. It is way more complex than people want to believe. There's so much we don't know about how the immune system responds to something, whether it has a memory for a long time and then sees something similar and
Right.
sets off a reaction of inflammation and cytokines and this sort of tumbling domino effect of blood clotting. They're all tied together. We don't know exactly how things are going to respond. It's why allergies are so complex. You can have been exposed to something your whole life, eaten the same thing, and all of a sudden your immune system decides, oh, I'm going to mount an allergic response to that thing. The immune system is truly one of the most complex things that we study in medicine, and there is a lot that we don't understand or know quite yet.
I have this sneaking suspicion that if we really figure out the immune system, because the immune system and the neural tissue co-develop, I have a feeling that there's something about the communications of the immune system and the regulation that will have echoes in the brain. I just sense it. Let me ask you something I know nothing about. Somebody asked it on my stream here, and you may not know anything either. I literally know zero. I don't even know what he's talking about. So let's see if this is.
Okay.
So
Try me.
can you talk about gain of function research? I understand the Wuhan lab is still doing such experiments there that the U.S. taxpayer is funding. He must
Yes.
mean make things more infectious or something. Go ahead.
Correct.
Do you know
Correct.
something?
And there's no question that that our government and the CDC were involved with gain of function research specifically on COVID-19 at the Wuhan lab, and that furthermore, some of the researchers doing that in Wuhan were pivotal in setting up the immunology and the virology lab at the University of Texas in Galveston, where they were also doing gain of function research on COVID-19. And that's, part of the information that came out when I came to the conclusion that this was not a naturally occurring virus. It has components in it that are stripped directly off of HIV, for example, components that do not exist naturally in nature, in a bat virus, for example. So yes, I do know about it, and yes, they are ongoing with that. I don't know the ongoing involvement of the U.S. government, but they certainly were involved in the past and received millions of dollars were sent to Wuhan to further that research.
It kind of feels like it was a misadventure along those lines. It really does.
Yeah.
And then the way the Chinese government responded to it, to me, looked like exactly that. And
Right.
the fact that if we could just prove that, I hope people will then be able to see that the state government responses to this pandemic and the mandates that the press demanded were so misguided, and can understand what they were using as their model was this standard that was not appropriate to, I don't know. I mean, yes, we need to do a lot. Yes, and we did do a lot, but using that standard was weird from the beginning.
What I can't say, and I know a fair amount about it, but what the conclusion I have not yet come to was whether or not there was actually an attempt to be weaponizing
I doubt it. I don't see. My sense is probably not sinister, just misadventure of something that.
I'm guessing it was abject incompetence, but as I said, it's a conclusion I'm not willing to say.
And to be fair, misguided research. I mean, why do they need to do that in the first place? I mean, why are you doing that? And it may have been with some longer term intent. I don't think there was sinister intent in the short term, but who knows, right? I mean,
agree.
My goodness, releasing something like that is.
Are you sure, Drew?
They would have just as much chance of getting harmed by this as anybody else. It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Susan, do you have any questions? You often have questions for Dr.
No,
Victory.
I'm watching the restream though. There's a lot of questions, a lot of good comments. And
Yeah, they are engaged here.
they like you, Kelly. You're very popular.
Good.
We missed you.
I hope I try to make sure that we're making things understandable for folks, because I think there's been so much misinformation and disinformation out there that hopefully we can break it down and make it at least understandable.
So,
what's going on.
somebody named Fartist, you'll appreciate that. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, thank you.
Is saying that some of the new variants are less likely to be destroyed by UV light. I don't know that that's true. I don't know that that's true.
I'd be surprised.
I would too.
Because, as I said, the variants are so minor. As I
Yeah.
said, the difference between, the SARS back in 2003 and this one is 20%. The difference, all of the variants we've identified so far to date of COVID-19, the maximum variation is 0.3%. Tiny, tiny variations, which means, said differently, 99.7% the same. Okay.
And the really
So-
and
so
the primary
I'd
issue.
be surprised.
Yeah, the primary issue, the thing we worry about is this E484K binding region, which a single amino acid substitution could, not necessarily, but could change how your immune sees this thing. And so that's how your antibodies see the spike protein. We don't know that that's true, but people worry about that. So when you hear people talking about it in the press, they're going, well, maybe this particular, it's a spike protein variant, and, B1351 or P1, it seems to be getting maybe around the immune system. We don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Now, the data that's coming in looks like that's not the case. It looks like we're actually in pretty good shape against most of these variants.
Correct. It appears that all of the variants still are responsive to the drug cocktails we're using, meaning everything from remdesivir to Regeneron, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, all of those, and they seem to be responsive to the vaccines, meaning they're being prevented by the current vaccines. So I am not worried about any of the variants that we've seen to date.
Yeah.
I
am. I got to tell you, let me just give you a perspective. As a COVID survivor, you do worry about it because this thing kicks your ass so much, you just don't want it again. So the possibility of it, it just, ugh. It's one of the reasons I'm glad I got the vaccine, right? I wanted whatever added benefits I could get, even though I might be clumping my platelets and who knows what.
You might have a proverbial
Get your eye wand, everybody.
Yeah,
I just want to let you know.
I'm still using my UVC lights. I love these things. I have to send Kelly one.
Go to drdrew.com/iwand.
Kelly, is there anything I missed in terms of the landscape since we were last together? I feel like well, let me ask this as a very, I don't know about provocative question, which is I'm still a Fauci fan. I've been, watching him since the 80s and still feel very good about the job he does. Where are you?
I think Dr. Fauci needs to have a retirement party.
I thought you might say that.
I know, I do. I don't know him personally. I have no reason to think that he is a bad human being. I think he has failed at his communication during this pandemic. I think it is time for a change and for somebody different at the helm who is more clear in their communication style, who has a broader look at the impact, as I said at the very start of this show, on the impact of all of these mitigation schemes on the entire population, because I think that is the mandate of public health. And I think that we need someone who has more credibility in terms of recent practice of medicine. Dr. Fauci may be a very bright man, but he hasn't practiced medicine for more than half a century. Last time he was practicing medicine, CAT scans had not been invented. And I don't think that that's a great optic. So I think he's done a great job in public service to this country, and it's time for his retirement party.
So when are you running for office, Kelly?
I am not interested in running for office. I actually considered very strongly a run for Congress.
Mm-hmm.
I am disgusted with the whole lot of it. And unfortunately, I think that when you run for elected office, you end up being beholden to a group of people that makes it difficult for you to stick to your guns when it comes to your standards, your morals, your ethics, and your ability to interpret the data. So I would absolutely consider doing something from an appointed position where I can speak my mind and do my job in public health, but I'm not running anytime soon.
Are you engaged with other public health physicians? Are you having dialogue with them? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what's the because in primary care they're just frozen in place. It's just
They
weird.
are. And I think, well, the people who I seek out and am closest with in public health share my beliefs. Unfortunately, many people are afraid in today's climate to speak out. As you well know, I have suffered the slings and arrows from the beginning of this pandemic. If we're even daring to talk about things like outpatient treatment with hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, for having some concerns about the vaccines. In today's social media climate, where you can be canceled or excoriated, or people post all sorts of heinous, slanderous, untrue things about you, and you have really very little recourse. Many people in public health are unwilling to do that. They're saying, "Yeah, you say it, Kelly." I have, not been fearful of doing that, and I will continue to speak my.
Yes, there has been also a sweeping swath of cowardice amongst our peers.
Virtue untested is no virtue at all.
And thank you.
It's hard to take the abuse.
Back to Dr. Drew Strikes Back here.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom Cigar. When my peers get bizarre on Twitter and misrepresent and misread and start getting ad hominem, I call them up. I want to know because we're colleagues. What this is what we do as physicians.
Right.
Cowards won't call back. Cowards.
No, it's really,
cowards.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people will say, call me a conspiracy theorist or an anti-vaxxer. I'm thinking, you don't know anything about, if you call me an anti-vaxxer, you clearly know nothing about me or the amount of work I've done.
These are peers that are saying stuff like this?
It's peers, yeah.
So you need to call them. Send them an email. Call them. You can look them up online. It'll show up. They're practicing physicians. Send them an email. Call them. Seriously, Kelly. These people need to be.
Imagine getting an email from Dr. Drew. It's like, uh-oh.
And by the way,
what did
I just did an interview with a guy who wrote a book called Spite, and he did all this fMRI data on people acting out in social media, and he showed that when the way the fMRI patterns develop during this acting out behavior, the ancillary motor cortex, where humanness is recorded and mirror neurons, all that kind of stuff, shuts down, and this certain area turns on that's associated with interacting with an object. So we just turn into objects, and at the point at which we contact them, we become people and we become colleagues, and guess what? Then they're exposed to their own shame and guilt for their shitty behavior. And that's fine. I'm not going to amplify that. I just want to get on the same page. But they're such effing cowards, they won't even do that. So I urge you to please do that.
And so it's really been, it was somewhat lonely in the first 9 to 12 months. Now, fortunately, a few more people are speaking out. But I think it's an important platform. And so as you know, I am on radio on a daily basis. I spend a tremendous amount of my time right now fighting this fight, trying, if nothing else, to answer people's questions, to break it down into understandable snippets for people who don't have any reason to understand the complexities of the immune system, and to try to make it understandable and furthermore, to make people less fearful. Fear is, we don't make good decisions ever in life when you're operating from a place of fear. So I'm not talking about sugarcoating something or saying that it's not a real pandemic or a real virus.
Oh my gosh, of course.
Can become very sick, but fear does not lead to
does
good
not
decisions.
help this. And let's be clear, pandemics suck. They are defined by excess death. That sucks. There's nothing good about any of this. But in the process of managing any illness, we are trying not to make things worse.
Right.
And we have done so. We have, and that is, to me, with the unforgivable part about this. We have caused illness, suffering, and death far out of proportion to the virus itself, and those impacts really need to be taken into account. Those are what I have called from the beginning COVID lateral damage, and the COVID lateral damage, meaning that resulted from our response to the pandemic,
outnumbers the people who have actually died or suffered from COVID by an order of magnitude. And that really, in my mind, is unforgivable.
Well, we will just kind of leave it there, I guess. It's been an interesting experience sharing this pandemic with you and sharing ideas and exchanges. You have, I like having differences because it helps shape and refine and sharpen either my defense of my position or actually moves my position in a healthier direction or more towards the truth, which is all I'm trying to do.
Exactly. But and one of the things that's great about what you're saying, though, Drew, is that you and I can have different risk tolerances and still be good people and still have the ability to be, we can both be really good physicians and be really good people who help our patients make good decisions. We simply have a different, having a different risk tolerance and being able to share collegially our opinions on things. If we lose that, I don't want to be in medicine anymore.
I am so with you on that statement. And let me refine for people what we're talking about when we say our risk management. We're saying that because of certain willingness to take on certain risks on my part, I see things differently. When Kelly says, what about these risks? She perceives and sees a whole arc of phenomena that I'm sort of ignoring because I'm allowing that risk to be there. But when she raises these things for me, it makes me think about my risk reward tolerance and whether or not I'm in the right spot with it and whether I should be thinking about the things she's thinking and worrying about. And I'm hoping that I move you sometimes when I say we got to forge on quickly and take those risks. And, it's a difference of perspective, not a difference of substance, which is, which is interesting. It's what makes a ball game, frankly. Well, as always, thank you. Follow Dr. Victory at Dr. Kelly Victory, just like like Victorious Victory. Is there a website right now you want people to go to?
No, I'm building my website, Shade. Not ready for prime time, but soon, because I want to have a format, Drew, where I can post videos like these, all of the podcasts that I do, all of the various radio that I do, on a platform where I don't need to worry about censorship and worry that they will be taken down by YouTube or whatever other platforms out there. So
we could easily
check out Locals.
You can look into Locals, and maybe we get you set up over there. But we will
coming soon.
We will likely be shut down today just because we mentioned
we won't.
ivermectin and things like that. I mean,
we called out YouTube, so
all right,
they're
that's good.
Hopefully,
I'm hoping not.
I mean, I think now we've evolved a little bit. It's not because we're not promoting fear or we're giving out good facts. So, I mean, I think we have learned so much, and I don't think we're going to be in trouble.
Good.
This time.
Well, I like that positivity.
I know you've been really nervous about it too, but
I'm not nervous about it. I'm sort of sick of it, really. It's just like,
I mean, listen, we're looking at the year from a professional standpoint, and you guys learned a lot. Everybody's learned a lot.
Yep.
So those are great questions because we started this with Kelly, a year ago, and everybody was very astounded by her ideas. But now she's kind of right. A lot of the things, and it's not that we thought she was wrong, but we thought, okay, well, we like your opinion, but we're going to do what we think we should do. So everybody has their choice. And honestly, well,
that was what Kelly was talking about. To be informed, make your vaccine choices accordingly. And, that's exactly what she's
and also educate yourself. Also, somebody mentioned we should have Dr. Zelenko back too. So
he's still recovering.
Yeah, he's still recovering. But, we're not trying to push anybody's ideas on everybody. We're just trying to give you all the information that we can.
If I have somebody on that sees exactly the world precisely as I do, that is not a very interesting conversation.
And YouTube did put Kelly's video back up, by the way.
I know.
Nice, nice.
As certain things became true, more and more things became true. They started saying, "Oh, let's put that back up there."
I'm surprised
now that the CDC and the WHO are saying exactly what I said back in March of last year, they've now put the video back up.
Yeah,
isn't it weird to you
that
with the World Health Organization coming down so strongly against lockdowns, isn't it weird to you that people are still locking down all over the place?
It's tragic. I mean, I was a signer of the Great Barrington Declaration against lockdowns, a long, long time ago. And the World Health Organization has finally seen the light and said the same. But the idea that we're continuing it, I think, is tragic. And there are certain places in the country that really are suffering as a result. California certainly being one of them.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. And thank you all for, I've been watching you very carefully on the restream here. Lots of great questions and engagement. And we'll be back on Monday, Susan. Is that correct? No, tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday.
Tomorrow. Yeah. I don't.
You might want to invest in a helmet, Drew, or a protective eyewear at night.
Protective eyewear, I think, would do the trick.
Just my trauma tip to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And back to my whacked out brain, I keep calling today Friday. I've been calling it Friday for I called it a couple times.
Well,
today,
that's probably because I poked you in the eye last night.
No, I think it's because we went out to dinner last night. It felt like the end of the week.
We did. We went out with Lisa Vanderpump and her husband and had dinner at Pump. It was fun.
She was great.
We had fun. We actually went out and had fun, Kelly. It's a new novel idea.
Wow, you actually went out in public
in Hollywood, like
outdoors in public.
It was so
good.
Yeah. It was.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's why we're allowed.
We all need to get back to that. It's a critical part of life.
They invited us. I'm like, yes, we'll go. What do you where? Like we want to let's go do something. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So. All right, Kelly, thank you so much. I'll let you go, and thank you all for watching.
Thanks for having me.
We will see you tomorrow around the same time.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Susan, where are you going?
Enjoy your half glass of wine. Good night.
Okay. Anyone who's watched me over the years knows that I'm obsessed with Hydrolyte. In my opinion, the best oral rehydration product on the market. I literally use it every day. My family uses it. When I had COVID, I'm telling you, Hydrolyte contributed to my recovery, kept me hydrated. Now, with things finally reopening back around the country, the potential exposure to the common cold is always around. And like always, Hydrolyte has got your back. Hydrolyte Plus Immunity, my new favorite, starts with their fast-absorbing electrolytes and adds a host of great ingredients. Plus, each single serving easy pour drink mix contains 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, 300 milligrams of elderberry extract. Hydrolyte Plus Immunity comes in convenient, easy to pour sticks that rapidly dissolve in water, make a great tasting drink, has 75% less sugar than your typical sports drink, uses all natural flavors, gluten-free, dairy-free, caffeine-free, non-GMO, and even vegan. Hydrolyte Plus Immunity is also now available in ready-to-drink bottles at the Walmart next to the pharmacy, or as always, you can find it by visiting hydrolyte.com/Dr. Drew. Again, that is HYDRALYTE.com/DRDREW. Be sure to use the code Dr. Drew 25 for a special discount. This pandemic began, we were not sure how it spread. Everyone began wearing masks and using hand sanitizers. Great ways to slow the spread, but a lot of people still get sick. I can personally attest to that. We now know that COVID-19 spreads via aerosols and droplets from the nose and mouth, and I've been thinking about this for a while. Why aren't we also sanitizing the nose and mouth, killing the virus directly at the place where it spreads? Why weren't more doctors thinking about this? Well, some doctors have done the research. Wish I discovered it sooner. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Haladyne. It's an FDA-registered antiseptic for the nose and mouth that's proven to eliminate 99.99% of the virus that causes COVID-19 in just 15 seconds. That's right. It's created by a team of clinicians with decades of experience in antiviral treatments, initially created to protect healthcare workers. These are smart scientists, and it's a great product that also eliminates many other viruses and infecting particles. I'm using both their nasal antiseptic swab and their oral spray to help protect those around me, and you should be too. For others and for yourself. Whether you're hopping on a 3-hour flight, always use it there, visiting grandparents, or attending a meeting that you can't miss, Haladyne's family of oral and nasal antiseptics give you the safe, easy, on-the-go antiviral protection for up to 4 hours. I encourage you to try Haladyne at haladyne.com today. My listeners get 10% off with the discount code Dr. Drew. That is HALODINE.com, discount code DRDREW. So obvious. It just makes sense. Stop the virus before it spreads and gets in your body with Haladyne.
When I cough, I pee out most of the time.
Right, and you can keep pushes that pelvic floor down further, and maybe over a long period of time, maybe. But if you do your Kegels, that goes against that, right?
I'm doing them right now.
Yeah, do some Kegels. Great. Polite applause. Congratulations.